Baby girl found a German shepherd carrying a wounded bird. What happened next melted hearts. What if I told you that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths? This story is about a child who did the unthinkable and changed the lives of everyone around them. A heartwarming, tear-jerking journey that proves love has no limits. Like, share, and subscribe, because this one will stay with you forever. The afternoon sun bathed the little town in a soft golden glow, the kind that made everything seem gentle and timeless. The narrow streets shimmered with warmth, and gardens bloomed with bright flowers swaying in the light breeze. Children's laughter carried faintly from a distance, but in one quiet yard, a baby girl was lost in her own world. Her tiny boots tapped against the ground as she chased after bubbles her mother had blown, each one catching a rainbow before it burst. She squealed with delight, clapping her little hands, her giggles echoing in the stillness. It was a moment of pure innocence, the kind of memory townsfolk often recalled years later, when the world felt simpler. But then the laughter faded. Her bright eyes, curious and searching, caught sight of something unusual at the edge of the street. A large figure moved slowly along the sidewalk, and at first, she thought it was just a neighborhood dog out on its own. The golden light glinted against its fur. A proud, majestic German shepherd, walking with deliberate care. Yet there was something different, something that made her stop in her tracks. The dog wasn't bounding or sniffing like others she'd seen. It wasn't carefree. It walked as though carrying a weight heavier than its strong frame. And in its mouth, cradled so delicately one could hardly believe it, was something fragile. Not a toy, not food, but a small bird, feathers ruffled, wings trembling, body weak and still. The girl's little lips parted in awe. Her head tilted, and her eyes widened as she tried to understand what she was seeing. A dog? Carrying a bird? Not like prey, not torn or harmed, but gently, protectively, as though the shepherd knew how delicate that life was. The bird gave a faint flutter, a tiny sound that barely escaped its beak. Its wings were bent awkwardly, as if broken, and yet it made no attempt to struggle against the dog's careful hold. Instead, it rested, trusting. And the shepherd, it walked with the steady grace of a guardian, not a hunter. The child's heart, still untouched by doubt or fear, responded before her mind could. She stepped closer, her tiny hands clutching her dress, her voice whispering, "Birdie." She didn't see danger. She didn't see strangeness. She saw kindness, raw and unexplainable, shining through the eyes of the German shepherd. In that instant, the world seemed to pause. The buzzing of bees in the flowers, the hum of the afternoon wind, even the distant chatter of neighbors, all of it melted away. All that remained was this extraordinary sight: strength carrying weakness, loyalty wrapped in gentleness, life protecting life. That moment, seen only through her innocent eyes, would not stay secret for long. Soon, her little gasp, her pointing finger, her tiny cry of amazement would draw others. And soon, what she saw would melt hearts beyond her family, beyond her street, beyond her small town. Because sometimes, it is not grand gestures or loud voices that remind us of what compassion truly looks like. Sometimes, it is the soft, trembling image of a wounded bird, carried in the mouth of a loyal dog, noticed by the pure eyes of a child. That moment, her innocent eyes saw a kindness so pure, it would soon touch the hearts of everyone in town. The small town always seemed to move at its own rhythm, untouched by the rush of bigger cities. The streets were lined with houses that had stood for decades, their porches sagging just a little, their shutters painted in colors that had faded under years of sun and rain. Gardens brimmed with roses, marigolds, and daisies, tended lovingly by older hands that believed flowers brought neighbors closer together. The faint creak of rocking chairs on porches blended with the occasional laughter of children chasing each other through yards, their voices carrying on the warm summer air. On this particular afternoon, the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass. A sprinkler ticked rhythmically somewhere down the street, sending tiny arcs of water glistening in the light. The sidewalks were still warm from the midday sun, and the whole neighborhood seemed to breathe in a gentle calm. For the townsfolk, it was one of those days that reminded them of their own childhood summers, endless, bright, and full of wonder. In one yard, a little girl was lost in her own world. She toddled between flower beds, her tiny hands reaching out to touch petals as though every bloom was a new discovery. A red ball rolled beside her, sometimes nudged with her foot, sometimes forgotten as she became fascinated by a butterfly drifting lazily past. Her laughter rang out like music, high-pitched and pure, the kind of sound that made passing neighbors smile instinctively. Her world was simple, a patch of grass, a sky so wide it seemed endless, and the boundless curiosity of a child who found magic in the smallest things. She crouched low to watch an ant crawl across a rock, then lifted her head to follow a bird darting overhead. Each sight, each sound was something to marvel at. Her mother watched from the porch, sipping tea from a mug, smiling at the way her daughter's imagination turned an ordinary yard into an entire kingdom of discovery. It was one of those afternoons that felt both fleeting and eternal, a moment in time no one knew would soon become extraordinary. As the girl spun slowly in circles, arms spread wide, her eyes caught something at the far end of the street, a shape moving with unusual grace. At first, she squinted against the golden sunlight, unsure what it was. Then, step by step, the form grew clearer, a dog, tall and noble, moving with a calm purpose. Its fur caught the sunlight, shades of gold and black glistening as it walked. It was a German shepherd, a breed known for strength and loyalty. But what struck the child wasn't its size or its breed. It was the way the dog moved. Not with the playful bounce she'd seen in other neighborhood dogs. Not with the distracted curiosity of sniffing and searching. No, this dog walked slowly, steadily, as though guarding something precious, something fragile. Her little head tilted, eyes narrowing in wonder. She noticed its posture first, its head held low, not in aggression, but in focus. Its ears twitched with alertness, but its body language was calm, measured. The dog wasn't wandering, it was carrying a quiet burden. The girl's eyes widened further as she noticed something glinting faintly in the shepherd's mouth. From the distance, she couldn't quite make it out, but it wasn't a stick or toy. The dog's jaw moved carefully, not clamped tightly, but curved around something it was holding with delicate restraint. Her heart thumped in tiny bursts of curiosity. What could it be? Why was the dog walking so carefully, so seriously, as if the whole world rested on every step it took? She let out a small gasp, enough that her mother looked up from the porch. But when the woman followed her daughter's gaze, she saw only the familiar sight of a German shepherd strolling by. To adult eyes, it was just another moment in the day, nothing remarkable. But the little girl kept watching, her small hands pressed to the fence as she leaned forward, her breath quickening with fascination. Children notice things adults often overlook. They see intention where others see routine. They sense stories in the spaces where adults assume none exist. And in that moment, the child sensed something larger than herself, a secret unfolding in plain daylight. The German shepherd's eyes flicked around as it walked, scanning the street with quiet vigilance. Its body was tired but steady, its tail held low in concentration. And every step seemed less like a stroll and more like a mission. The girl whispered to herself, as though her voice might disturb the quiet mystery, "Doggy." Her tone carried awe, the soft sound of someone watching a hero approach, even before she knew why. That was the first hint. The very first moment when she realized this was not just a dog passing by. Something about it felt purposeful, different, as if it was protecting something unseen, carrying a story hidden in its strong yet gentle frame. And though she didn't yet know what deep inside her innocent heart, she felt it, this dog was not simply walking through the town. It was guarding something. The little girl's curiosity tugged her forward like an invisible thread. She stepped off the patch of grass and toddled closer, her tiny shoes crunching softly against the gravel path. Every few steps, she paused and looked back at her mother, who gave her an absent smile, unaware of what her daughter's eyes had caught. The world for the adults was just another lazy afternoon, but for the child, it was the beginning of a revelation. The German Shepherd slowed as it reached the corner of the street. Its gait was steady but cautious, almost ceremonial, as though each step was measured with care. And then, as the distance between the child and the dog shrank, the truth revealed itself. In the shepherd's mouth rested a fragile, trembling creature. A bird, its feathers wet and ruffled, one wing hanging awkwardly at its side. The little beak opened and closed weakly, a soft whimper escaping as if pleading with the world to notice its pain. Its tiny chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, each one a battle against exhaustion. But it was not the bird's condition that stole the girl's breath. It was the way the dog carried it. The shepherd's jaw, so strong it could crush bone, held the bird with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible. Its teeth barely touched the creature, its tongue cradling the fragile body to keep it steady. Every tilt of the dog's head was careful, every step measured so the trembling bundle would not fall. The dog's amber eyes glowed with something no one could mistake: protection. Fierce yet tender, watchful yet calm. They were the eyes of a guardian, not a predator. The little girl froze, her mouth forming a perfect O of amazement. She had seen dogs chase birds, bark at them, even frighten them away, but never this. Never a dog carrying a bird as though it were carrying a secret treasure. Her tiny hands clutched the wooden fence as she leaned closer, her heartbeat quickening. She whispered under her breath, "Birdie." The word floated out with wonder, more a prayer than a name. The shepherd paused. For the briefest moment, its ears twitched, and its gaze flicked toward the child. Not threatening, not warning, simply acknowledging her presence. In that glance, she felt something pass between them, something invisible yet undeniable: trust. The bird shifted faintly, its feathers brushing against the dog's muzzle. A faint cry slipped out, weak but piercing. The girl's eyes welled up with sympathy. Her little heart, too young to understand cruelty but old enough to recognize pain, responded instantly. She took a careful step forward, her arms stretching out instinctively as though she could help. The shepherd did not move away. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, as if showing her what it carried. The bird's tiny wings trembled again, its body quivering in the cradle of the dog's mouth. It was a sight so powerful, so unexpected, that had an adult witnessed it, they might have questioned their own eyes. But children do not doubt kindness when they see it, they accept it. A rush of tenderness filled the girl's chest. In her young mind, she didn't see a contradiction, a powerful dog holding a delicate bird. She saw harmony. She saw compassion where others might have seen danger. She saw strength bending to protect weakness. Her little voice, barely above a whisper, carried an honesty no adult could have matched. Where others might have feared the dog, she saw compassion shining through him. The German shepherd's gaze softened as if he understood. For a long moment, the street was utterly still. The buzzing of bees in gardens, the rustling of leaves, even the sounds of faraway cars seemed to fade. It was only the three of them: the child, the guardian, and the fragile life in his mouth. The girl crouched slightly, her tiny hands resting on her knees, eyes wide with wonder. She wanted to touch the bird, to comfort it, to help it heal. But something in her instinct told her not to rush, not to startle the moment. Children, in their innocence, often carry an unspoken wisdom. They know when silence is stronger than words. The shepherd finally moved again, lowering its head carefully toward the grass near the fence. With a slow grace, it adjusted its hold, placing the wounded bird gently onto the soft earth. The little creature whimpered faintly but did not try to flee. Instead, it blinked weakly, as though trusting the guardian who had carried it this far. The child's breath caught in her throat. She took one small step forward, her eyes shining. The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, not playful, but reassuring. He was not surrendering the bird. He was sharing it, letting her see what he had chosen to protect. She knelt on the grass, her fingers brushing lightly against the blades, her gaze fixed on the tiny, fragile body. The bird's wing trembled, its feathers sticking at odd angles, but she thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Her little lips curved into a smile, soft and filled with awe. The shepherd sat beside the bird, his massive frame a shield against the world. He lowered his head close, watching both the child and the creature with equal care. In that moment, an unspoken pact was formed. She would not harm. He would not threaten. Together, they would watch over something smaller than them both. Her mother, still unaware of the miracle unfolding just steps away, called gently from the porch, "Sweetheart, don't go too far." The little girl turned her head briefly, then looked back at the shepherd and the bird. She felt a certainty too strong for words. She couldn't leave yet. Something important was happening here. And though she didn't fully understand why, she knew she had just witnessed something extraordinary. A dog, fierce yet tender, carrying a wounded bird not as prey, but as a promise. The little girl's heart raced with excitement. She had just witnessed something no one would ever believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. Her tiny legs carried her back toward the house, her curls bouncing with every step. "Mommy! Mommy!" she cried breathlessly, tugging at her mother's hand. "The doggy has a bird, but he's not hurting it, he's helping it." Her mother chuckled lightly, brushing the damp hair away from her daughter's face. "Sweetheart, dogs don't help birds. Maybe you saw it carrying a toy or something it found in the yard." But the child's eyes were wide with certainty. She shook her head furiously. "No, Mommy, it's real. The bird is hurt, and the dog is saving it." Her little voice carried such conviction that her mother hesitated. Curiosity, mixed with a hint of disbelief, finally pulled the mother from her porch seat. She followed her daughter down the short path to where the German shepherd still sat, watching over the fragile bird. And there was the truth. The woman's steps slowed as her eyes widened in astonishment. The shepherd sat tall, its amber gaze sharp and protective, its massive frame casting a shadow over the tiny bird at its paws. The bird, its wing bent and feathers in disarray, shifted weakly but did not try to escape. It seemed to understand it was safe beneath the dog's watch. The woman gasped softly, "Well, I'll be." Within minutes, the story began to spread. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, drawn by the unusual sight. One by one, they drifted closer, curiosity overcoming the pull of their daily routines. The old couple from across the street shuffled forward with their umbrellas, whispering in awe. A young boy who usually teased stray animals stood silently, eyes wide, as though witnessing a lesson written by nature itself. At first, skepticism rippled through the small crowd. "Dogs chase birds, they don't save them," muttered one man, shaking his head. But as they stood there, watching the shepherd's steady composure, the doubt began to fade. The dog's patience was extraordinary. Whenever the bird stirred restlessly, he lowered his head, his muzzle hovering close, releasing a soft huff of breath as if to reassure it. If a neighbor stepped too near too quickly, his ears pricked and his gaze sharpened, not with aggression, but with firm warning. This one is under my protection. The scene mesmerized them all. Strength shielding weakness. Predator defending prey. It was nature, but rewritten in a way few had ever imagined. The little girl knelt once more on the grass, ignoring the damp earth soaking into her knees. She leaned close, whispering softly to the bird and the dog, her tiny fingers brushing the air just inches from their bond. The shepherd flicked an ear in her direction, acknowledging her presence. It was as though the child and the animal shared a silent understanding that no words could capture. The injured bird flapped its good wing feebly, trying in vain to lift itself from the ground, only to collapse back against the grass. A ripple of pity ran through the crowd. Some turned away, unable to bear the sight of such helplessness. But the dog did not flinch. He simply adjusted his position, curling his body closer, tail sweeping protectively around the fragile creature. One of the older neighbors, a retired teacher, murmured, "I've lived in this town for over 70 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Maybe we've underestimated animals. Maybe they feel more than we think." The little girl's father, who had joined the crowd, crossed his arms thoughtfully. "That's no ordinary dog. Look at him. He's refusing to leave. He knows that bird won't survive alone." And indeed, it was true. The shepherd made no move to chase after the children playing across the street. He didn't wander toward the tempting smells drifting from nearby kitchens. He didn't even glance at the other dogs barking from behind their fences. His world, in that moment, revolved solely around the trembling bird at his feet. Hours seemed to pass, though it was only minutes. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the street. The gentle breeze carried the scent of summer flowers, mingling oddly with the heavy tension of the scene before them. A child whispered, "Why doesn't he just eat it?" But the little girl answered with the clarity of innocence, "Because he loves it. Can't you see?" That single sentence silenced the murmurs of the crowd. It was then that the symbolism struck them all. The sight was more than just a dog and a bird. It was a story, a lesson unfolding right before their eyes. The strength of one being cradling the weakness of another. The unlikely friendship of predator and prey, bound not by instinct, but by compassion. The baby girl leaned against the fence, her eyes never leaving the shepherd. She felt proud in a way her young heart couldn't yet explain. Proud that she had been the first to notice. Proud that she believed when no one else did. The bird tried once more to spread its wings, but the effort was too much. Its body sagged against the grass, and a soft chirp escaped. The crowd winced, expecting the shepherd to grow restless. But instead he lowered his head, touching his nose gently to the bird's side, as if to remind it, "You're not alone." A hush settled over the neighborhood. Even the usually restless children stilled, sensing they were witnessing something sacred. The little girl whispered again, her voice trembling with wonder, "He's its guardian." And from that moment, no one argued. The shepherd wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a guardian, a silent sentinel protecting something fragile that the world might otherwise have trampled. The crowd lingered, their hearts softening as they absorbed the lesson written so clearly in fur and feathers before them. Even the skeptics felt their doubts melt away. For once, everyone seemed to agree, this was not coincidence. This was compassion. The murmurs of the crowd eventually turned into action. Compassion had replaced doubt, and now everyone felt a sense of responsibility. Parents began exchanging glances, neighbors whispered hurried plans, and soon a small group rushed back to their homes to gather what little they thought might help. Within minutes, a cardboard box lined with an old towel appeared. Someone brought a small first aid kit, the kind kept for skinned knees and kitchen accidents. Another neighbor arrived carrying a bowl of clean water. They were not veterinarians, but their hearts were moved enough to try. The German shepherd, however, remained immovable. His body formed a barrier around the fragile bird, his amber eyes tracking every motion of the people around him. Each step closer was measured by his cautious gaze. A low, soft growl vibrated from his chest whenever someone leaned in too quickly, though it was not a sound of anger. Rather, it was a reminder of his claim, a warning that this fragile life was under his guardianship. The little girl, however, felt no fear. She shuffled closer, her small hands gripping the grass for balance. Her parents gasped softly, ready to pull her back, but something stopped them, the sight of the shepherd's posture shifting ever so slightly when she neared. His shoulders softened, his ears twitched, and his eyes, those watchful, guarded eyes, rested on her with surprising gentleness. She leaned close to the great dog, her tiny voice carrying words no adult would have dared speak. "It's okay. You can trust me." The shepherd blinked slowly, a long sigh escaping his nose, as if he understood. Then, in an act that drew a collective gasp from the crowd, he lowered his massive head and carefully opened his jaws. The wounded bird, wet feathers trembling, was set down on the towel laid before him. The motion was deliberate, delicate, as though the shepherd had been waiting for this very moment, waiting for someone worthy to continue what he had begun. The crowd stood stunned. A dog known for strength and power had surrendered his precious charge not to an adult, not to the ones bustling with boxes and supplies, but to the child who had first believed in him. The little girl's mother knelt beside her, carefully lifting the towel to cradle the bird. Its tiny chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, each breath a fragile testament to its will to live. The father opened the first aid kit, fumbling with trembling hands as he pulled out antiseptic wipes and bandages, though he wasn't sure how to use them on such a delicate creature. The shepherd, freed of his burden but not his duty, leaned in close. His wet nose brushed the edge of the towel, his eyes never leaving the bird as though to ensure they were doing it right. Every now and then, he would glance at the little girl, as if asking her to keep watch with him. The bird let out a faint chirp, and the sound tugged at everyone's heart. Could it survive? Could this fragile creature, so small in a world so vast, endure what had been done to it? The neighbors worked together, some holding flashlights as the daylight dimmed, others fetching more towels and warm cloths. The child dipped her fingers into the bowl of water and gently stroked the bird's feathers, whispering encouragement the way one might to a baby doll or stuffed toy. Her innocence lent a tenderness no adult hand could match. And as she worked, the shepherd pressed close to her, his fur brushing against her shoulder. The little girl placed her other hand gently on his paw, her voice steady despite her young age. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're helping him now." At those words, something extraordinary happened. The shepherd's tense frame seemed to ease. His breathing slowed, his tail gave a faint wag, and for the first time since the crowd had gathered, he sat back on his haunches. It was as though he had passed the torch of guardianship to her, trusting her in a way he trusted no one else. The suspense hung thick in the air. The bird shifted, flinched, and struggled weakly against the towel, its injured wing refusing to fold properly. An older woman whispered, "It may not make it," and the words cut through the hearts of everyone listening. The little girl looked up sharply, her eyes shining with determination. "No," she said firmly, surprising everyone with the certainty in her voice. "He carried it because he knew it could live. And I believe it too." The crowd fell silent again, humbled by the faith of a child and the quiet loyalty of a dog. The mother dabbed gently at the bird's wing, wiping away dirt and dried blood. The father carefully adjusted a soft strip of cloth to brace the broken limb, his hands trembling but steady enough to give the fragile creature some chance at healing. Every move was accompanied by the shepherd's steady gaze and the little girl's whispered reassurances. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The bird's chest continued to rise and fall, and though its eyes remained half-closed, the steady rhythm of its breathing gave hope. The towel warmed beneath its body, and the gentle caresses of the child's fingers seemed to calm it. The neighbors, who had at first been skeptical, now leaned closer, their eyes wide with awe. They were witnessing not just the rescue of a bird, but the union of innocence and loyalty, child and dog working side by side, driven not by knowledge or skill, but by pure compassion. Finally, the bird settled, its fragile body no longer thrashing but resting quietly. The child smiled through tears, looking at the shepherd. "See? He's going to be okay," she whispered. The dog let out a soft huff, his ears flicking back in relief. He lowered his head onto his paws, his eyes never leaving the bundle, but his posture no longer screamed of desperation. Instead, it carried the quiet pride of a guardian who had done his part. For the first time since the afternoon began, the tension lifted. The crowd exhaled collectively, their shoulders relaxing. Some even smiled, wiping away tears they hadn't realized had fallen. And yet, the question lingered in every heart. Would the bird truly survive the night? Could this fragile creature, carried in the jaws of strength, live long enough to take flight again? Only time would tell. But one truth was undeniable. The shepherd had placed his faith in the little girl, and she had risen to the task. And in that moment, under the watchful eyes of the town, a bond was forged between dog, child, and bird that no storm of doubt could ever undo. The little bird was carried with utmost care into a neighbor's car, wrapped snugly in the towel that now bore traces of its struggle. The German shepherd followed close behind, his paws splashing in the puddles, his head lowered, eyes locked on the fragile life he had worked so hard to protect. No leash bound him, no command directed him. He simply knew he had to be there. And no one dared stop him. At the small town's veterinary clinic, the atmosphere shifted into one of hushed urgency. The vet, a kind middle-aged woman with decades of experience, was stunned when she saw what they brought in. "A dog? Bringing in a bird?" she repeated, shaking her head as though it were a fable and not reality unfolding before her eyes. But when she bent closer, seeing the broken wing and faint but steady heartbeat of the bird, her professional instincts took over. "All right, let's get him stabilized," she said firmly, motioning for her assistance. The bird was placed under warm lights, its wing gently examined and braced. The shepherd pressed his nose against the examination table, his breath fogging the cold metal surface. A low whine hummed from his throat each time the bird shifted or chirped in pain, as though he were reminding everyone present, "Be careful, that's mine to protect." The little girl, standing on tiptoe beside him, whispered, "They're helping him. You did good." She stroked his ear, and he leaned into her hand, the weight of his head briefly pressing against her tiny palm. Hours later, the vet emerged with a tired smile. "The bird is weak, but it has a chance. The wing is broken, but not beyond repair. With rest, warmth, and care, it may fly again." The words spread quickly through the waiting room, where neighbors had gathered, unwilling to leave until they knew. A ripple of relief moved through the crowd, some smiling through tears. The shepherd exhaled deeply, almost as if he understood, and curled up at the girl's feet, content to keep vigil. Days turned into a quiet rhythm of healing. Each morning, the little girl and her parents visited the clinic. And each time, the shepherd was already there, waiting by the door as though he had never left. He would sit beside the small cage where the bird rested, his eyes never straying far. When the vet changed bandages, he leaned close, his ears twitching at every soft peep. When the bird fluttered weakly, he steadied himself, as if bracing to help should it fall. The little girl would press her nose to the glass of the cage, humming little songs she'd made up on the spot, songs of sunshine, flowers, and bravery. "He's listening," she'd say proudly, when the bird's eyes blinked slowly. The shepherd would nudge her shoulder as if to agree. The story began to spread beyond the clinic walls. A neighbor wrote about it in the local newspaper. Someone else posted a photo of the shepherd sitting guard outside the clinic door, captioning it, "The Guardian of Hope." Soon, families from across town came to see for themselves. They brought seeds for the bird, biscuits for the dog, and smiles for the little girl. What had begun as a simple act of compassion was now breathing new life into the entire community. And yet, behind all the wonder, there lingered a question. Why this shepherd? Why a bird? The answer came one evening when an old man approached the clinic. He wore a faded cap, his steps slow but deliberate. His eyes widened as soon as he saw the shepherd. "I know this dog," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. The crowd around him turned. "You do?" someone asked. The old man nodded. "He belonged to my neighbor, Thomas. A kind soul lived at the edge of town. Thomas loved birds more than anything. His yard was filled with feeders, little houses, and water bowls for sparrows, robins, even ducks. Every morning he'd sit outside, humming, with this very shepherd lying at his feet. And the birds, they'd come without fear, as if they knew they were safe with him." The little girl's parents exchanged glances, their eyes softening. The shepherd, hearing the man's voice, lifted his head. His ears perked, and for a brief moment, his eyes seemed to brighten with recognition. "But Thomas passed away last year," the old man continued, his gaze falling sadly to the floor. "Since then, I hadn't seen the dog. I wondered where he had gone, if he had survived. Now I see. He carried his master's kindness in his heart. He remembered what Thomas taught him, to guard, to protect, to love the smallest of creatures." The revelation hit the crowd like a wave. Gasps and whispers filled the air. The little girl knelt beside the shepherd, her hands cupping his face. "You're like him, aren't you? You're kind too." The shepherd licked her cheek in response, his tail thumping once against the floor. Suddenly, the story was more than just about a bird and a dog. It was about legacy, how love and compassion live on long after a person is gone, passed down in ways the world can't always explain. The shepherd had not chosen the bird at random. Somewhere deep inside, guided by memory and instinct, he had seen fragility and had answered it with loyalty. Weeks passed, and the bird grew stronger. Its feathers regained their sheen, its chirps grew louder, and at last, its wings began to flutter with determination. Each time it practiced in its small cage, the shepherd would tilt his head, ears pricked as though he were its coach. The little girl would clap and cheer, her laughter filling the room with warmth. Finally, the day came when the vet said, "It's time." The bird was carried outside, placed gently on the grass beneath the wide blue sky. The shepherd sat close, the little girl at his side. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as the bird stretched its wings, gave a determined flutter, and then, against all odds, lifted into the air. It wasn't perfect. Its wings still carried a scar, and its flight was wobbly at first. But it was free. It circled once, twice, then soared higher, its song echoing across the town square. The shepherd barked once, a sound of joy, and the little girl clapped until her hands stung. Tears rolled down cheeks, smiles spread like sunlight, and hearts swelled. What had begun with a single act of kindness had blossomed into a miracle shared by all. The old man, wiping his eyes, whispered, "Thomas would be proud. His spirit lives on, not just in this dog, but in all of us who were lucky enough to witness this." And in that moment, the town knew the German shepherd was not just a rescuer of a bird. He was a keeper of compassion, a reminder that kindness never dies. It simply finds new guardians. The days that followed brought a change no one in the town could ignore. The little girl and the German shepherd had become nearly inseparable. Wherever she went, the shepherd followed, whether it was toddling down the street in her tiny shoes or sitting cross-legged in the grass with her dolls. He was there, a silent sentinel, his protective eyes scanning the world around her as though she were the most precious treasure he had ever been entrusted to guard. Her parents watched with wonder. At first, they were cautious, unsure how a big dog and a toddler could share space so effortlessly. But it didn't take long for their fears to melt. The shepherd was gentle in every gesture, lowering his head so she could pat him, walking slowly beside her small steps, even lying down to match her height when she knelt in the dirt to play. It was as if he understood the fragility of childhood and chose to mold his strength into tenderness. The girl gave him a name. "Hero," she whispered one morning, tugging at his ear while he lay curled at her feet. And from that moment on, he became Hero not only to her but to the entire town. Meanwhile, the bird, the tiny, fragile creature whose broken wings had once carried the town's fears, was healing steadily. The vet's careful work, the shepherd's quiet vigil, and the community's shared love had turned what once seemed hopeless into a story of resilience. Each day the little girl and Hero visited, bringing fresh warmth and laughter to the clinic's rooms. And each day, the bird grew stronger, its chirps louder, its wings stretching just a little farther. Then, at last, came the day the town had been waiting for. The vet announced with a smile, "The bird is ready. It's time we give it back the sky." The news spread like wildfire. Families gathered, children clutched their parents' hands, and elders shuffled to the park, eager to witness the moment. It wasn't just about a bird anymore. It was about hope, loyalty, and the strange but beautiful friendship between a child, a dog, and a creature that had once been too weak to survive. On that warm afternoon, the community gathered at the town square near the park where flowers bloomed and willow trees swayed gently in the breeze. The little girl stood front and center, her tiny hand resting on Hero's back. The bird, perched carefully on the vet's fingers, fluttered anxiously, its feathers gleaming in the sunlight. Silence spread as the crowd waited, breaths held in anticipation. The girl leaned down to Hero's ear and whispered, "Ready?" Hero tilted his head as if answering, his eyes fixed on the small creature about to take flight. The vet lowered her hand, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The bird hesitated, its wings trembling with both fear and longing. Then, with a sudden burst of determination, it leapt into the air. Wings spread wide, it caught the breeze and soared upward. A gasp erupted from the crowd, followed by cheers that echoed across the park. Children clapped, elders wept, and neighbors hugged one another. Above them all, the bird circled once, twice, before rising higher, its song ringing clear and sweet. The little girl squealed with delight, clapping her hands until they were red. Hero barked joyfully, his tail wagging as though he, too, understood the miracle unfolding. And together, girl and dog watched with wide eyes as the bird disappeared into the horizon, free at last. That image of a fragile bird flying away while a loyal dog and an innocent child looked on became etched into the town's memory. It was more than a release, it was a symbol of freedom, loyalty, and the power of compassion that bound even the unlikeliest of souls together. After the release, the crowd didn't just disperse. They lingered, talking softly about what they had witnessed. "It feels like we've all been given something," one neighbor said, wiping away tears. Another nodded, "Yes, like we've been reminded of what truly matters." And Hero? He stayed by the little girl's side, nudging her hand until she bent to hug him tightly. Her arms barely wrapped around his neck, but he leaned into her embrace, closing his eyes with a sigh. It was a bond beyond words, a promise made not in speech but in heartbeats, the kind of bond only the purest of friendships could hold. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, the girl's parents opened their front door. Hero padded inside for the very first time, his paws clicking gently against the wooden floor. The little girl squealed with happiness and tugged him straight toward her room, where she laid out her favorite blanket for him beside her bed. From that night forward, Hero was no longer just the town's guardian of hope. He was family. He slept by the little girl's bed, waking at every sound, his ears alert, his body curled close in watchful loyalty. In the mornings, he trotted beside her as she toddled through the yard. In the evenings, he rested in the garden while she plucked daisies to braid into crowns for him. And at every moment in between, they were together, two souls woven by kindness, their bond needing no words to be understood. The community smiled each time they saw them. Some waved, some snapped photos, some whispered, "There goes the girl and her hero." And in those simple scenes, the town found a lasting reminder that love is not measured by size or strength, but by the quiet devotion we offer to those who need us most. It was a bond built in the shadow of pain but blooming in the light of healing. A bond between innocence and loyalty, between a child who saw compassion where others saw danger, and a dog who carried forward the kindness of a master long gone. Together, they had not only saved a bird, they had lifted an entire town's spirit. And as the bird's song still echoed faintly in the distance, carried by the breeze, it seemed to say what no one else could put into words. Love, once given, never dies. It only finds new wings. In the days after the bird's release, the little town seemed to carry a softer rhythm. People walked with lighter steps, conversations carried more warmth, and the story of the little girl, the German shepherd, and the wounded bird spread beyond the streets where it had first unfolded. It was retold in shops, whispered in schoolyards, and shared around kitchen tables. For many, it wasn't just a sweet tale. It was a reminder that miracles can appear in the most unexpected forms. For the elders of the community, the memory of that moment stirred something deep. They had lived long enough to know life was often full of burdens, hard winters, lost loved ones, the ache of time. Yet here, in a fleeting summer afternoon, they had witnessed a truth simple enough for a child to recognize. Compassion does not belong only to humans, nor does strength always mean dominance. Sometimes, true strength is shown in gentleness. The image of the shepherd carrying the wounded bird lingered like a painting in their minds. Dogs were supposed to chase birds, to scatter them, to act on instinct. But Hero had chosen differently. He had chosen to protect, to cradle, to deliver the fragile creature into the hands of those who could heal it. And in that choice, people saw something extraordinary, the proof that loyalty and kindness know no boundaries, not of species, not of size, not of voice. One elderly man, who had lived by the park for over 70 years, was overheard saying, "I've seen wars, floods, and loss. But I've never seen a dog carry a bird like it was his own child. That was no accident, it was a lesson." His words were repeated many times, passed down like wisdom carved into stone. The little girl's part in it all was no less important. While adults first doubted, hesitated, or second-guessed, she had simply believed. She had trusted her eyes and her heart. Where they saw impossibility, she saw devotion. Where they saw danger, she saw gentleness. That innocent clarity was what brought the story to life. And in her laughter, in her small hands stroking Hero's fur, the town rediscovered something many had forgotten, that sometimes the purest truths come from those who have lived the least years, because their hearts remain untouched by cynicism. As time passed, the bond between the girl and Hero grew into something unshakable. And though the bird had flown far away, its presence lingered in the story itself. The park bench where the bird was released became a small landmark. Neighbors even placed flowers there, calling it the Bench of Kindness. Children ran by pointing at it, and elders sat there to reflect quietly. It became more than just wood and iron. It became a symbol, a reminder that life is not about how much we take, but how much care we give even to those most different from us. The story also carried a wider moral. People realized that life often covers beauty in strange disguises, pain, hardship, even cruelty. Just as the bird's fragile wings were hidden beneath fear and wounds, so too do many lives hide their worth behind scars. And just as Hero revealed that beauty by refusing to abandon the bird, so too could humans reveal the hidden goodness in others, through patience, through compassion, through love. For the seniors, especially, the story touched an intimate chord. Many of them had lived long lives, filled with lessons of loss, endurance, and quiet faith. They found wisdom in the shepherd's choice. "It doesn't matter how strong you are," one grandmother said, holding her grandchild's hand. "What matters is how you use your strength. Use it to lift, not crush. To protect, not destroy." Her words mirrored what the story had already shown, that gentleness is not weakness. It is the highest form of power. And kindness, even the smallest act, can ripple outward in ways unseen, reaching hearts that may have long since grown tired. In time, people began calling Hero the guardian of kindness. He was not just a pet anymore. He was a living reminder that loyalty, compassion, and love transcend barriers. Every time he trotted beside the little girl, people smiled, knowing they were looking at a miracle born from kindness. And perhaps that was the greatest reflection of all, that miracles don't always come with thunder or fire, but sometimes in the quiet steps of a dog cradling a bird, or the laughter of a child who believes in the goodness of what she sees. As the seasons turned and leaves began to fall, the town carried this story like a flame in the dark, a flame that warmed hearts when life felt too heavy. They remembered the lesson not only for themselves but for the generations to come, that compassion is not bound by size, strength, or circumstance. It can exist where least expected, and it can change everything. And so, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of innocence, of loyalty, of kindness that heals rather than harms, then carry it forward. Share it with someone who still believes in miracles born of gentleness. Share it with someone who has forgotten, so they might remember again. Because the world will always need reminders that love, no matter how small, can move mountains. That loyalty, no matter where it comes from, can heal wounds. And that kindness, whether shown by a child, a dog, or even a stranger, remains the truest miracle of all. And just like the bird who once lay broken but flew again, so too can every heart rise when it is lifted by love. So I ask you, if this story touched you, share it with your children, your friends, your neighbors. Share it with anyone who still believes, or who longs to believe, in the miracles of kindness and loyalty. Because in the end, that is the story's greatest gift, not just what happened, but what it teaches us still, that love always finds a way to heal. Every story has its ending, but the emotions last forever. Thank you for your time, your heart, and your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button and share the love. Until we meet again in another story.